Now I'm happy to introduce and welcome Linda Duba.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for the kind words and the opportunity to speak this morning. I think the story we heard from Dr. Seuss could many times define the South Dakota legislature. And it isn't necessarily a party that divides people, but it's a stubbornness to want to remain on your side of the wall and not find opportunity to talk to one another and work together towards a common good for the people of South Dakota. This morning, I'll give you a little bit of background about me. I was born in Sioux Falls, South Dakota back in 1956. I'm a fourth-generation Sioux Fallsian, so Sioux Falls is very deep in my roots. And, educated here in the public school system, went to South Dakota State University, and came back to Sioux Falls actually, which is unlike the brain drain we're experiencing now, which is unfortunate. And I started my career as a school teacher, and it was just a wonderful opportunity for me to work with children. And unfortunately, after 4.5 years of teaching, there were 3 jobs in there that I lost to cut back. So as many of you has experienced, sometimes in your career you have to go find a different path. And so that path led me to Citibank, where I worked for 26 years. Citibank gave me great opportunity that I never ever dreamed when I graduated from college. And I met so many interesting people there. But back in 2008, things were changing in our economy as they are today. And so I made the choice to leave Citi and had the opportunity to look for another position. And as we all know, there was an economic downturn, but I was very fortunate to land with a company out of Israel. Now, who knew that was coming to me? As a consultant for their company, they had been a vendor of Citi's, and so I had the opportunity to work for them for 8 years to my 60th birthday. And unbeknownst to, I actually told them when they interviewed me that when I turned 60, my goal was to leave corporate America and really return to my community, so to speak, to do public service work, nonprofit work. And so I did. I quit a very excellent and well-paying position at age 60, and I was able to go to take a job as, some of you might have heard that program, the Girls on the Run coordinator out of MB. Yeah. And I did that for 2 years for the state of South Dakota, and for all young girls across the state. It was just a tremendous opportunity to work with the youth in our state. But I also had another dream of running for office, and that nonprofit, it would not have been possible for me to serve in the legislature and work in that capacity, so I resigned my position, and the people of District 15 found it, they found me agreeable, and they elected me to the legislature in the fall of 2018. In the meantime, I went back to the Sioux Falls School District where I started 40 plus years prior, and they hired me back. And so for 3 years, up until May of last year, I worked as an educational assistant at Laura B. Anderson Grade School. Some of you may know where that is in the northeast part of town. It's a wonderful community of people. Many of the children at Laura B. are first-generation immigrants. And it was just 3 years of the most wonderful thing that I could have done to end my professional career as a paid worker. And in the meantime, the school district allowed me to go back to Pierre every January for 3 months and work as a legislator. And so that was just an opportunity. I did retire last May. I hit that magical age of 65 where Medicare kicks in. And so when I hear Medicaid expansion, I know how important it is to have medical coverage and medical benefits, and it should be, a right and not a privilege. And so, I was able to work up until my 65th year, and now I'm taking full advantage of Medicare, one might say. I had a little bit of it'll be a year on Tuesday that I suffered a heart attack. And now Peter and I have known each other for, I don't know, 30 years. I've run the Boston Marathon with Peter and many a long run. But sometimes we can't see inside our body and understand our genetics. And my genetics worked against me and put me flat on my back a year ago. But by the grace of God and great medicine, I stand here before you today, a year later, much healthier than I was a year ago. So that's a good news transaction, right? Yeah. And I was able to work through all of that all last summer into the fall and through the legislative session. The legislature meets, for those of you who don't know, we meet from January through March each year. We attend 4 days a week, and then one day we have the opportunity to come back. Some people stay in Pierre. I tend to come home every weekend. I did that for those first 3 years so I could go back and at least keep up with the kids at Laura B. And now I come back because I think it's just important to be in my district and talking to the people of Sioux Falls and in District 15. So we started on January 10th. I actually serve on the Appropriations Committee, and we started a week earlier. So we finished our session on March 28th. We actually finished on the 10th, and then we have a 2-week hiatus in there, and we go back on what we call veto day to deal with any vetoes that the governor might have. And then, as you know, it's well publicized that we also went back on April 12th to deal with an impeachment of the Attorney General. So needless to say, it was quite an eventful and interesting year in the legislature, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the budget, since I spend a large portion of my time in appropriations meetings. Our meetings start every day at 7:30, and we don't break until 12 and sometimes 12:30. Which does give me a little bit of time to run and get something to eat and then prepare for the afternoon session with a 1-hour meeting with my caucus. But I spend a tremendous amount of time focusing on the budget itself and the departmental information that comes to us in the terms of hearings, and then all of the bills that are brought before the Appropriations Committee before they can go to the floor. So when we talk about the budget, this year was highly unusual because of the amount of federal money coming into our state. And that seems to be a topic that everyone wants to know. What did we spend all that COVID money on, right? Where did it go? And how did it get used? And is there any left over? Well, there are three parts of the South Dakota budget. We have general funds, which we in this room contribute to. It's our sales tax and any of the other taxes that we pay. Our wheel tax, you buy your hunting licenses, you pay for your car license. There's excise taxes through construction. There are several ways that fund the general fund. And the general fund this year, part of our overall budget was $5.2 million. $billion, excuse me, not 5.2 million, $5.2 billion budget here in the state of South Dakota. And of that, 1.8 billion came from general funds. Now, we had an extremely high year of sales tax revenues, and we attribute that very much to the fact that the federal government was sending stimulus money to all of us in the form of one-time payments. And they were also funneling monies into different departments, Department of Education, Department of Health, Department of Social Services, where we in turn turned around and spent that money into the economy. So that raised the amount of sales tax in particular in the state. We also, of that $5.2 billion, we received $1.8 billion, or the same amount that we get from sales from federal funds. Federal funds, and the majority of those federal funds come in the form of Medicaid and Medicare payments to the state, and then other grants that different departments are receiving to run their budget, such as the Department of Social Services. And Game Fish and Parks. Game Fish and Parks receives a sizable amount of money from the federal government to do some of the work that they do. The Department of Transportation, they receive federal funding for highway work and road work and other things that we do. So imagine that 1/3 of the funding that we get to fund the state comes from the federal government. Just imagine that. Also us, because we're taxpayers, right? And then finally we have other funds. And those sources come from other ways that we have revenue across the state. That's almost $1.5 billion. So that is our overall high-level, high-level budget. $5.2 billion. Think about that. Now, what did we do with all that money? How did we use it? Well, we took 6% and applied that to an increase in salaries for all state workers. So if we have any state workers in here, you will see that on July 1st. Or you better see it, and if you don't, I want you to contact me about that. We sent 6% of it to our school districts. Now, school districts can take that money and they can distribute that how they want. We want them to apply that to teacher salaries. And for the most part, they do, but not always. So if you're working for a school district, you want to understand how that's allocated. We at the state level do not have the ability down at the local control level to determine that. And then we also gave 6% to what we call community support providers. Community support providers are critical to the running of the state. Let me give you some examples. Lifescape, for example. Some of you know who they are. Many of our mental health facilities are our community health supporters. So any of those individuals who are delivering goods and services to people who are in need, addicted individuals, mental health situations. So that is our budget. And now we have two portions of our budget. We have our ongoing 2023 budget that I just talked about, that $5.2 billion. And then we have a supplemental bill. And the supplemental bill is what we budgeted for the prior year. But, so I apologize. I haven't felt like that for almost a year, but you just never know. Stuff happens. I was talking about the supplemental bill. So in 2022 fiscal year, we set a budget. And then in the middle of the year, we come back as we start appropriations in January. Our fiscal year goes from July 1 to June 30th. So when we come back in January, we've already finished 6 months of the 2022 fiscal year, and we're looking at it and saying, okay, how are we doing? Well, we had a windfall of money, a huge windfall of money. We had $200 million. So what do you do with that? How can you best utilize that and help the people of South Dakota? And again, much of this was due to our increase in sales tax revenue, but also the CARES money that we had received had a tremendous impact over the last 18 months. And when you put those into the South Dakota economy, good things happen, right? So here's what we did with that one-time money. We took $150 million of it, and we applied it to housing, and in particular, housing infrastructure. Now, you're going to see more come out about that, and there was a big bill that we worked on very hard to reduce the amount or allow for builders to go apply for grants and loans, low-interest loans or grants, depending on the size of the community, to support 1/3 of their infrastructure costs, which will generate more housing across the state of South Dakota in small towns as well as Sioux Falls. Sioux Falls could use that up itself, quite honestly, but we have to think about the entire state. We used $30 million to expand the DSU cybersecurity program. Now I'm going to tell you a little story. I worked for Citibank for 26 years. It was a great career, and I've got nothing but good to say about how Citibank changed the look and feel of the state of South Dakota and our economy. Many of you don't know that Citibank came here because we didn't cap our interest rates. They also came here because we have hardworking people who are willing to do a job. And they had great success here. But one of the things that was holding Citibank back in the early 80s, when I was there, was that we couldn't find programmers to move from other parts of the country to Sioux Falls. So we couldn't find them. Well, in the meantime, Dakota State was floundering as a college, and they were almost ready to go under. And Citibank met with the Board of Regents and the governor and said, we're willing to pump money into that university if they are willing to change their curriculum and become more of a technical, tech-based, and produce programmers for our programs. And DSU did that, and they made major changes to the courses that they taught. And we may have some people in here who benefited from that, I don't know. But I can tell you one thing, that we hired as quickly as we could. As those graduates were coming out of DSU, we were hiring them at Citibank. And so were the hospitals, and so were the businesses across South Dakota. And we were creating internships for young people. And that was a great partnership that we did in the 80s. We're doing it again now with cybersecurity. So we're going to take $30 million and invest it into more programming about cybersecurity. We are the #2 cybersecurity college in the United States of America. That's a big deal. And we're going to invest in our youth and in those programs. And so that money that you see is not coming to Sioux Falls. It's actually going to go to improve programming and hire individuals and market that program. The money that you hear about that's coming to Sioux Falls is the monies that we put aside $10 million, and that's only a portion of the $50 million that's going to be used to build a cybersecurity incubator building here right out by the Pentagon and Great Shots. All of you know where that is. Sanford donated the money. We're going to build a building there that will be housing companies that want to come here and hire those DSU graduates. The DSU graduates. And so we'll keep them here in South Dakota. Those are not $20 or $20 an hour job, which is not a bad job. I'm not going to disrespect that. These are six-figure salary jobs, and they're going to keep our people here, and that's what we need. So that was money. I look at that and I say money well spent. These are big-time, one-time investments. $25 million we're investing to fix our rural access infrastructure, our culverts and our buildings. If you've traveled on rural roads, you'll see the crumbling of these structures and our culverts, and we need to reinvest in that. Our farmers need those roads to be safe and open when they're trying to bring their crops. We spent $15 million on a biomedical innovation facility that's going to break ground, or if it already hasn't, this spring, out in the northeast part of the city of Sioux Falls. We have a biotech building out there. We need to build another one. We have companies that want to move here and use them as a startup, but they won't come here if we don't have the facilities to bring them here. So we're going to have, it's going to be called the Discovery District. We've got a similar one up in Brookings, and now we'll have one in Sioux Falls that'll be affiliated with the University of South Dakota. We applied $10.2 million to our nursing homes, which actually has now ballooned into $30 million. So we took $10 million of one-time funding and spread it out across our nursing homes because they they're crushed under their increasing costs, their need for safety because of COVID, and their rising costs due to nursing. If you haven't noticed, we have a nursing crisis in this state, as well as all over the United States. And so we're having to hire travel nurses who are at a much higher rate than normal. So we gave them $10 million, and the federal government matched that twofold, and we got another 20 million. And so we're helping our nursing homes. Isn't that what we should be doing?
Absolutely.
We gave $8.8 million to the Cultural Heritage Museum out in Pier. If you haven't been out there, get the opportunity to go. It's a jewel, but it's 35 years old and it's leaking and it needs repair. So repair it. We gave $8 million to Lifescape. Now they've raised 56 million of their own dollars, and they'll be announcing where they're going to build their new campus. That old campus broke ground in 1948, 8 years before I was born, and that was my neighborhood. I grew up in that area of Sioux Falls. I went to Spellerberg Park every day. There wasn't a day that I didn't pass. You know, back in those days we called it Crippled Children's. Yeah. Lifescape is a blessing to us, and the work that they do for our disabled young people and families, you can't know the importance of that money that I believe is very well spent. We're investing $7.5 million into Lake Area VOTEC for manufacturing. It's for manufacturing lab space. Again, what are we going to use that for? For our students who are attending those technical colleges to leverage that when they graduate. 6.5 went to the Richmond Dam out in West River. That dam was completely and totally destroyed, and we need to rebuild it. It is a danger to the people who live downstream. We're applying $6 million to the Cottonwood Field Station. Now, I had the opportunity to visit that last summer in the middle of August, and it was hotter than Hades. But that station does tremendous research for our cattle and our ranchers in terms of how to deal with drought conditions and how to maintain their feed programs. So money well spent. We're spending $5.6 million on Lake Alvin and Newell Lake. Again, both of those areas were devastated by those floods in 2019. You know, back then we had too much water, and what we wouldn't give for that too much water right now. Isn't that the truth? But
Honestly.
it just devastated the spillway out at Lake Alvin, and in Lake Newell there's just tremendous damage, so we're going to go repair those this year. We gave $5.2 million to purchase a building on the campus of School of Mines. I had to think there for a minute. My brain isn't very sharp this morning. School of Mines. Rapid City had a developmental building on the campus. They outgrew that building, and so they built their own building. But on my visit to the campus last summer, we saw the sad, sad state of research space for tech. And South Dakota Tech receives amazing grants every year from the federal government to do research. In fact, they're one of the top 3 in the country, and so we need to get them the space that they need to even further expand that research. Research that pays off in dividends, not only for the students and the college, but for the people across the United States. You gotta spend a dollar to return even more money. We're giving $5.1 million to the National Guard Readiness Center right here in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So we purchased some land, and they will be building a facility where they can do their all-in-one training. The federal government will give $15 million to that project, and we'll give 5.1. We're spending $5 million on alcohol and drug treatment program grants for women. Now, this is something that we have not done in this state. We have a problem with drugs and alcohol, and the majority of women in the South Dakota prison are there on drug and alcohol addiction problems. We put them in prison, we send them home, and we don't help them to get better. These are the grants that nonprofits can apply for to develop those programs for addiction. And I'm sorry, a 30-day addiction program doesn't get it done. This is near and dear to my heart. we were able to obtain an additional $5 million out of this one-time money, and we're giving it to 80 different nonprofits across the state of South Dakota for victims of crime. We are talking women, children, families. These are people who are suffering from physical and sexual abuse. They need help with counseling. They need help with shelter. They need help with legal services. These operations, these 80 services had their federal funds cut dramatically. This plugs a one-time hole. The federal government is now ramping that money back up, but again, what were we going to do? We were not able to give services to these children and these families that were in dire need and in fear for their lives, quite frankly. I visited several of these places, and I got to tell you, that's one of the best things we could have done. We're giving $5 million to Mitchell Botech to build an ag and diesel power space. They need the space to run the equipment that they have. Another $4.5 million right here at Southeast Tech to upgrade all of our medical simulation equipment and expand. We are going to double the number of nursing students that we can take at Southeast Tech, but we need the updated equipment to train our phlebotomists and our lab techs and our CNAs and our nurses. And so we're going to spend that money to do that. We're giving $2 million down in Vermillion to the National Music Museum. I don't know if any of you have ever been there, but that place is a treasure. We have millions of dollars of instruments that have been donated, and now we're going to be able to warehouse those instruments and then put them on display. And then finally, $2 million to our fire and EMT for equipment and training. The majority of people that service and come and put out fires and come take you to the hospital when it's necessary in small towns are volunteers. Did you know that? That they're volunteers. They don't get paid to do this, and we need to support them through training and equipment upgrades. They are operating with, I can't remember, I think we call them life packs. Those life packs, the lifespan of one of those is 8 years, and they're running on 15 years of use on most of these. So this is an important thing. This is what we're doing with the excess money that we had. We're spending it wisely. Now, what are we doing with the ARPA funds? Where's that going? You know, that ARPA bill that was passed just about a year ago. $600 million is going for local water, wastewater, and stormwater projects across the state of South Dakota. Right here in good old Sioux Falls and Lewis and Clark is getting $75 million. And then I believe we're getting another $40 or $50 million right here for our own wastewater treatment plant in Sioux Falls. Coming out of these funds, $70 million is going to go to update the state public health lab. That's a real necessary need. If we didn't know it before, our lab services were not adequate during this pandemic of COVID. So we're taking ARPA funds, again, to enhance and build an entire new public health lab. Now, I tried to convince our Department of Health people to move it to Sioux Falls, where we've got, you know, the people and the resources, but no, they want to keep it in Pierre. So I lost that little battle, but I tried. And I really do believe it would be better served in Sioux Falls, but we can't have everything. We're spending $50 million of our ARPA funding on broadband. Now, we're pretty fortunate here in the Sioux Falls area. We've got decent broadband, but if you live down by T, not so much. And if you live out in the Black Hills, it's awful. So we have got to reach those places that don't have access to the internet. We're spending ARPA funding now. ARPA funding, this is coming from the federal government, $29.5 million to build a new Lincoln Hall at NSU. The building that they're using right now was built in 1908. It was a dormitory. It's time. It's asbestos filled. It doesn't meet the needs of the students nor the university. We're spending $8 million to build out another wing at the Black Hills State University and Rapid City campus. And this is specifically to support nursing expansion in the Black Hills. Again, we're finding it very hard to train and retain nurses in the western part of the state, and this is our opportunity to double that size, and they will be part of the SDSU nursing program. We're going to spend $5.8 million in Pier on the women's prison to build a valuable mental health service, to expand mental health services and physical health services for our women's prison in Pier. If you haven't visited it, it's a sad, sad, sad place right now. We did not support the $36 million request that the governor made to build a women's prison in Rapid City. We're going to be looking at that, and I'll talk to that in a minute. But, and there's a reason for that. So that gives you an idea of all of those funds that we handled in the legislative session in 2022. It's a lot of money. It'll boggle the mind at times. But what I want you to understand is we're trying to focus on the people of the state to improve education opportunities, to improve health care, to improve just our overall quality of life. We have a long, long way to go. Now this summer, there are going to be four committees that will be working throughout the summer. I'm asking to be on the Juvenile Justice Committee and on the Prison Facilities Committee. I don't know if I'll get assigned to either of them. I'm hoping at minimum juvenile justice. We need to take a look at what we're not doing for our young people who are suffering from trauma and turmoil. And 6 years ago, we passed a law that said we've got to stop incarcerating our juveniles and start rehabilitating them. We had the highest rates of juvenile prison sentencing in the country. So we've cut that back by 70%. But what we didn't do is we didn't fund the programs that are needed for those diversions to help them get better. We've somewhat funded it, but our focus now is going to be on really what are the needs for kids that are struggling. And in many cases, they're breaking the law because they're suffering from other issues, traumas that you and I can't even fathom or imagine. All right, so we need to help them. And I'm going to be part of that study that I'll come back and make recommendations. One of the other things that we're looking at, the governor has asked to spend $600 million on new prison facilities. So I'm trying to get on that committee since I'm on appropriations, to go look at what we really need. Are we just going to build more prisons, or are we going to try and work on taking care of the people who work in our prisons? Because it's well publicized and well known that we have problems in our prisons and our employees are not happy. And not only that, our prisoners aren't happy and we're not rehabilitating them. So we need to take a holistic view of that to determine what are our needs, do our facilities meet our needs, and what are we doing about helping people. Then we have another group that'll be looking at property taxes across the state. With the rise in value, up go our property taxes. I just wrote a big fat check on Friday, as I'm sure many of you did. And we also have one more group that's going to be looking at how we can regionalize, again, prisons. We're really worried about locking people up rather than rehabilitating. But some of the counties across the state cannot house their prisoners, so they want to look at regional options. So those are the things that are happening across the state of South Dakota. You should get engaged, get involved, meet your legislators, ask them questions, and let them know what is important to you. Because none of us should be out there acting upon what we think is best, but what you think is best. So I appreciate your time today and your patience. I feel a little bit better, but I'm going to probably go home and lay down.